Interior, local shop. In April of this year, Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton sat down in the office they share in Muswell Hill and typed those 3 words at the top of a script. "We just looked at each other and said, how weird is this?" says Shearsmith. "Once we were past that, it was great." The local shop is, of course, the dark heart of Royston Vasey, home to Tubbs and Edward and their fellow oddities and psychopaths in the League of Gentlemen, which returns to television next week for the first new episode since 2002. The League never officially split up, but other projects, Psychoville and Inside No. 9 for Shearsmith and Pemberton, Sherlock for Mark Gatiss and West End hit Ghost Stories for Jeremy Dyson, took over. "We thought, let's have a break. We'd come to the bottom of the well," says Shearsmith, 48. "It was just a rest and it lasted 15 years. Reece Shearsmith Even now. I'm not very comfortable being me." This year marks the sketch show's 20th anniversary with the BBC. It first aired on Radio 4, which was a good excuse to do what they'd been threatening to do for years and get back together. Fans will be delighted to see that all of the old favourites return, from murderous shopkeepers Tubbs and Edward, to eccentric Auntie Val, Mr. Chinnery, the incompetent veterinary start officer Pauline and her pens. Watching the first of 3 half-hour episodes, filmed on the same street in Hatfield, Derbyshire, set to the same funky score by Joby Talbot, it's like they have never been away. "That's exactly the feeling we thought would be right, if it felt like it was just on again," says Shearsmith, who, for all his grand genial exuberance on screen, is a quietly modest presence off it. "It never occurs to me that we've got any more standing than we ever did. When they all got back together, it felt like nothing had changed, although they are all, surprisingly, given the horror-laden excesses of their vision, more squeamish these days. We can't watch those horrible Saw films. I avert my eyes now." A little old man in a chair. "I came in with a little box and said, this is Jeff's original Tash. I'd like to use it, please, but a lot of it was a case of, right, we've got to find these wigs are in." The quartet toyed with the idea of a knowing, metatextual return, where the inhabitants of Royston Vasey were being filmed by a documentary crew, but opted to play it straight, or a straight ass they get. To that end, the sets and costumes of the original had to be recreated from scratch. Shearsmith, though, had kept one crucial prop safe. "I came in with a little box and said, this is Jeff's original Tash. I'd like to use it, please, but a lot of it was a case of, right, we've got to find these wigs are in." The great thing is that we haven't let ourselves go so much that we don't look like the characters anymore. It wasn't all japes playing Edward, with his distinctive pig nose, again meant that Shearsmith's own nose got infected. The end got torn off when I pulled it off. There was a big scab on it for weeks. Suffering, literally, for the art. In the new episodes, several of the characters' stories take an unexpected twist, and Royston Vasey itself is under threat from boundary changes. Gatiss has drawn parallels between Brexit Britain and the town that likes to keep outsiders out. A local shop for local people. "There's something there," says Shearsmith. "The ethos of this country has caught up with Tubbs and Edward, unbelievably. One of our first thoughts was that Royston Vasey would be even worse now, more derelict and in decline. And that tells you something about the climate. We've never been about wielding an axe with our grotesque weary, it was never really about politics. But by happenstance it's there. The ethos of this country has caught up with Tubbs and Edward, unbelievably. One of our first thoughts was that Royston Vasey would be even worse now, more derelict. That tells you something about the climate. Time has caught up with Royston Vasey in other ways, too. Trans taxi driver Babs, with her gruff voice and hairy chest, is from another comedy era. There's a question mark over all of it, if you get into the grey areas of everyone's particular taste, says Shearsmith mildly. It's a balancing act. We thought there's no point in doing it if we feel like we can't do it again, and it would return toothless. In the case of Babs, they tackle changing attitudes head on, but they never considered, for example, casting women in any of the female parts. That would have been very different. We were a 3-man troupe with Jeremy writing, and we just played all the parts. We didn't try to do it like drag. I play Stella like a real northern woman. The funny thing isn't that there is a man dressed as a woman, that's not the joke. We always try to imbue them with as much truth as possible. Pemberton, Shearsmith and Gatiss as legs akimbo. Photo BBC Ben Blackall. Shearsmith recently watched the originals for the first time and found them really odd. The tone is all over the place, he says. What it is, of course, is four young men who have been given the opportunity to do a television program and are doing all their tastes, all in one. Let's do a bit like The Shining, and a bit like Don't Look Now and a Victoria Wood type one. And yet weirdly the sum of all those parts is an identity. It was bigger than all of us. It seems unlikely that a comedy so bizarre, dark and grotesque would get commissioned now. I don't think it would, agrees Shearsmith. It's hard now to have a singular voice. It's harder to write a drama without having it go through a process which tries to cater to everyone and ultimately caters for no one. Read more. The League of Gentlemen's original Christmas special was terrifying. Shearsmith grew up in Hull and wanted to be an artist, though a turn as St. Boniface in a school play ignited a burning desire to try acting. He studied drama at Yorkshire's Bretton Hall, thinking that if he didn't end up acting, he could at least teach it. I always say, it's like having a degree in washing up. A nebulous thing. Pemberton and Gatiss were in the year above and were already fabled for their eccentric plays, including Death Warmed Up, about a hitman who is hired to kill Death. Dyson was at nearby Leeds University. After graduating, they all went their separate ways. Shearsmith, gloriously, became an apprentice to the makeup artist Christopher Tucker, who created the Elephant Man. His job was to mold masks for various productions of The Phantom of the Opera. It was quite a mundane thing, like working in a fish finger factory. Boring. Still, it explains a lot about his penchant for utterly transforming himself from part to part. Even now, he admits, I'm not very comfortable being me. At The League of Gentlemen's Apocalypse premiere in 2005. Photo Gareth Cattermole. He and Pemberton got back in touch when the latter asked him to design a poster for his theatre company, 606, and cast him in a couple of plays. They started writing dark sketches with the other two and, in 1994, Above a Pub, The League of Gentlemen was born. They took it up to the Edinburgh Fringe where they won the Perrier Award in 1997, got picked up by the BBC and never looked back. It seems quite revered now, but at the time, it was always a niche thing. It didn't get big like Little Britain. It was always BBC Two, quite cultish. It's at its best live. The audience would think, this is awful now, please make it stop, and then you punctuate it with a laugh. The relief would be palpable. There will be a live arena tour next year, taking the league back to its roots. I think it's at its best live. I think it felt the most alive. In the fact that we could play with that uncomfortableness, when it would get really dark and the audience would think, this is awful now, please make it stop. And then you punctuate it with a laugh. The relief would be palpable. When they took a break in 2005 after the League Christmas panto, Pemberton and Shearsmith continued to work together on 2 series of Psychoville. When it wasn't recommissioned for a third, they came up with the idea of an anthology in the style of play. For today, A Tales of the Unexpected. Anthologies had gone out of fashion, mainly because it was felt that it was hard to build an audience when starting from scratch. Each week, in the case of the relentlessly innovative Inside No. 9, the continuity comes from Shearsmith and Pemberton, who imbue every episode with their dark humor and dazzling twists, and also appear in every single one, playing tramps or professors, witchfinders, cat burglars and call center workers. The first episode of the new series of Inside No. 9, featuring Rory Kinnear back center with Shearsmith. Photo Sophie Mutavalian, where previous episodes have taken place in a karaoke booth, a wardrobe, and even in complete silence. The fourth series kicks off with a typically challenging scenario, a Shakespearean, uber-fast, centered on a hotel corridor with 9 doors. Naturally, it is all in iambic pentameter. There is also one about an old comedy double act reuniting their first two-hander. They come back together to do some sketches and they've sort of grown apart. That was very poignant to do. There were some resonances. We set ourselves a challenge in Series 4 of Shall We Just Write a Funny One? And it never comes out that way. It always feels slightly lacking when it's simply one thing. It never feels like you get that emotional grab if you've not mined it for something deeper. Writing is always just a means to an end, really. To write things so I can be in them. No one else would ever cast me in all these great parts. One write for myself. Despite writing 3 hit comedy series, Shearsmith still doesn't see himself as a writer. It's always just a means to an end, really. To write things so I can be in them. No one else would ever cast me in all these great parts one write for myself. That's not true, I say. What about The Widower, in which he played murderer Malcolm Webster? Or his two recent turns on the London stage in The Dresser and Hangman? It's nice when you're thought of for dramas, he says. We're sort of our worst enemy in a way. By being too versatile you don't get noticed. I remember John Cleese told Ronnie Barker, you've got to do one thing, otherwise no one will know who you are. You'll be hidden in all these many parts, brilliant at them all but not a known thing. What would he say his known thing is? All of my characters have unbidden rage, he laughs. I like playing disproportionate anger, it's a very funny thing to see. David Morrissey and Reece Shearsmith in Hangman, at the Royal Court. Photo Tristram Kenton. He is about to go to New York to make his Broadway debut in Hangman and is most worried about leaving his wife Jane and two teenagers. I never go anywhere. I'm very homely and I orchestrate my life so I don't spend a night away. He hasn't yet allowed his children to watch his shows, although they did their homework on the back of his old scripts. They're tearing off these pages for scrap and I think we toiled for weeks on that. He says, keep doing Inside No. 9 forever. The possibilities of the form are endless. Even if the budgets aren't, we get less and less money to do it each time it comes round, but he now has his eye on a more mainstream hit. No. 9 is great but it has its limited, blinkered appeal. In people's minds, we're quite dark and we'll always be that. The holy grail would be to do a version of a BBC One comedy, written by me and Steve, that suddenly everyone knows about. No. 9 is great but it has its limited, blinkered appeal. In people's minds we're quite dark and we'll always be that. So it would be lovely to think of a way of doing our world that's a bit more broad. But maybe there simply isn't a way. Because then it wouldn't be our world. The League of Gentlemen starts on the 18th of December on BBC Two at 10 p.m. Inside No. 9 returns to BBC Two on the 2nd of January.